The office felt colder than usual, though the sun was streaming through the glass walls. I froze mid-step, my coffee trembling in my hand as his smile widened, that smug, arrogant smile, and he said it loud enough for half the floor to hear. "You're done here, Seela. Pack up your desk." Every word landed like a punch. Laughter bubbled quietly behind him, my so-called colleagues pretending not to stare. My heart thumped like a drum in my chest, and I couldn't breathe fast enough. This isn't happening. Not now. Not me. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles white, while he straightened his tie, casually sipping his espresso as if he hadn't just destroyed my career in front of everyone. "You'll figure something else out, won't you?" he said, that patronizing tone wrapping around my ears like smoke. I swallowed, the bile rising in my throat. The humiliation was suffocating. And the worst part, he didn't even flinch when he saw the betrayal in my eyes. He just smiled. I'm Seela Monroe. And what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I wasn't broken. I was furious. And furious has a way of turning into methodical, unstoppable focus. 6 months earlier, everything had been different. I'd been the rising star at Harrington Consulting, the one everyone came to when projects went sideways. I worked late nights fixing client disasters, smoothing over mistakes, building relationships that actually lasted. I'd landed 3 of our top 5 accounts, including the impossible ones nobody else wanted to touch. My boss, Kyle Harrington, had praised me publicly back then. "Seela's our secret weapon," he'd say at team meetings, and I'd believed him. I'd trusted that hard work mattered, that loyalty meant something. But then Troy arrived, fresh out of business school with his expensive suits and his father's connections. Kyle treated him like royalty from day one, giving him lead positions on projects I'd spent months developing. When the promotion I'd been promised went to Troy instead, Kyle had shrugged. "He's got the right presence for leadership, Seela. You understand." I'd smiled and nodded, swallowing my disappointment. That was my first mistake. I should have seen then what Kyle really valued. Not competence or dedication, but appearances and connections. The favoritism was blatant, but I'd stayed silent, believing my work would eventually speak for itself. After the firing, I sat in my car in the parking garage for an hour, hands still shaking. The humiliation burned through my chest like acid, but underneath the shame, something colder and sharper was forming. A plan. I pulled out my phone and started making notes. Kyle depended on 5 major clients for most of his revenue. I knew every single one of them personally. I'd built those relationships, solved their problems, earned their trust. He thought firing me would erase that history, but he was wrong. Those connections were mine, not his. I opened my laptop and began a careful audit of everything I knew. Client pain points, contract renewal dates, projects that were struggling, Kyle's weaknesses as a leader, Troy's complete lack of real experience. I documented it all methodically, my anger transforming into cold focus. By the time I drove home that night, I wasn't crying anymore. I was calculating. Kyle had made a critical error. He'd underestimated me. He'd assumed I was powerless, that firing me would be the end of the story. But he'd just given me the freedom to become his biggest competitor, and I was going to make him regret it. The next week was torture. I watched from the outside as my former colleagues posted about team celebrations and project wins on social media. Photos of Kyle and Troy at a client dinner, laughing, acting like I'd never existed. One former coworker, someone I'd considered a friend, posted, "New energy at the office, excited for what's next." The comments underneath stung worse than the firing itself. "Seela who?" someone joked. Others liked it. I closed the app, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. They thought I was finished. They thought being fired meant I'd failed. That night, I overheard 2 former colleagues at a coffee shop near the office. They didn't see me in the corner booth. "She'll never land anything big," one said, stirring sugar into his cup. Kyle made sure to spread the word about performance issues. Performance issues. The lie was so blatant it almost made me laugh, but instead of confronting them, I sat silently and listened. I learned exactly what story Kyle was telling about me, and I realized something important. Perception was power. If Kyle could shape the narrative, so could I, but I'd do it smarter, quieter, with results he couldn't deny or spin. 3 days later, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart skip. Audrey Chen from Vanguard Solutions, one of my former clients and easily the sharpest executive I'd ever worked with. "Seela, I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "I'm calling to tell you that whatever Kyle's saying about you is garbage. You're the only reason our account stayed with Harrington." I felt emotion rise in my throat. Thank you, Audrey. That means more than you know. She paused. Between us. Troy completely dropped the ball on our quarterly report. He missed 3 deadlines, and when he finally delivered, it was full of errors. I had to redo half of it myself. My mind started racing. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Don't be sorry, be ready. Our contract with Harrington is up for renewal in 4 months, and I'm already exploring alternatives. If you're open to consulting work, I'd love to talk. I kept my voice steady despite my pounding heart. I'd be very interested in that conversation. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. When I hung up, I sat back and smiled. Kyle had just lost his first client. He just didn't know it yet. I spent the next 2 weeks in research mode, treating it like the most important project of my life. I created spreadsheets tracking Harrington Consulting's client portfolio, contract renewal dates, project timelines, key decision makers I'd worked with personally. I identified patterns in Kyle's mismanagement. He overpromised and underdelivered constantly. He cut corners to maximize profit margins. He took credit for other people's work while blaming them for his mistakes. Troy was following the same playbook, probably because Kyle was training him. I also researched the market, identifying gaps that a new consultancy could fill. Clients wanted transparency, honest timelines, and genuine expertise. Everything Kyle's firm pretended to offer but didn't actually provide. I found something else too, something that made my pulse quicken. 3 of Kyle's major clients had contracts expiring within the next 6 months. All 3 had complained to me privately about service quality before I was fired. That was my window. I didn't need to steal clients aggressively. I just needed to be ready when they started looking for alternatives. And they would start looking, because Kyle couldn't deliver without me holding everything together. I'd been the foundation he'd built on, and now that foundation was gone. Kyle held a company-wide meeting the following Monday. I heard about it from a former colleague who still liked me enough to keep me informed. Apparently, Kyle stood at the front of the conference room, practically glowing with confidence, and announced that Harrington Consulting was entering its most profitable quarter ever. He talked about new opportunities, expanded services, aggressive growth targets. Troy sat beside him, nodding along like they'd personally built the company from scratch. What Kyle didn't mention was that 2 projects were already behind schedule. What he didn't say was that clients were quietly expressing frustration. What he certainly didn't acknowledge was that I'd been the person preventing these exact problems for years. My former colleague texted me after the meeting. He seems really confident. It's weird. I smiled at my phone. Let him be confident. It'll make what comes next more interesting. She sent back a confused emoji, but I didn't elaborate. Kyle's confidence was actually perfect for my plan. Overconfident people make mistakes. They stop paying attention. They assume they're untouchable. And that's exactly when they're most vulnerable. I just needed to be patient and let him keep digging his own grave. My meeting with Audrey went better than I'd hoped. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, away from the business district where we might be spotted. She was direct, as always. I want to hire you as an independent consultant for our Q3 strategy review. Troy's work has been consistently disappointing, and I don't trust Kyle to fix it. I presented the proposal I'd spent a week perfecting. Clear deliverables, honest timelines, transparent pricing. Everything Harrington Consulting claimed to offer but rarely delivered. Audrey read through it carefully, then looked up with a slight smile. This is exactly what I needed. When can you start? We shook hands on a 3-month contract worth more than I'd made in 6 months at Kyle's firm. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. This was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to 2 other former colleagues who'd left Harrington on bad terms. Both were talented professionals Kyle had undervalued and pushed aside. I proposed collaborating on select projects, pooling our expertise. They agreed immediately. We weren't a formal company yet, just a network of professionals who actually delivered quality work. But we were building something, and word was starting to spread. 6 weeks after my firing, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Consulting Inquiry Vada Industries." My heart jumped. Vada Industries was one of Harrington Consulting's oldest clients, a manufacturing company worth at least $200,000 annually. I'd worked with their operations director, Marcus, for 2 years. He'd always appreciated my thoroughness and honesty. The email was professional but warm. "Sela, I heard through industry contacts that you're consulting independently now. We're evaluating some operational inefficiencies and would appreciate your expertise. Would you be available for a preliminary conversation?" I read the email 3 times, hardly believing it. This was bigger than Audrey's project. This was a direct challenge to Kyle's core business. I replied within an hour, professional and enthusiastic. We scheduled a video call for the following week. That night, I lay awake thinking about the implications. If Vada Industries hired me, Kyle would notice. He'd realize I wasn't just surviving after the firing. I was competing. Part of me worried about escalating things too quickly. But a larger part of me remembered his smile when he fired me, the laughter from my former colleagues, the humiliation. He'd made his choice. Now I was making mine. The video call with Marcus went smoothly. He explained that Vada Industries had been experiencing communication breakdowns and missed deadlines. Projects that should have taken weeks were stretching into months. "We've raised these concerns with Kyle multiple times," Marcus said, frustration evident in his voice. "He promises improvements, but nothing changes. Troy seems overwhelmed, and honestly, we're losing confidence." I listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. I didn't badmouth Kyle or Harrington Consulting. I didn't need to. The problems spoke for themselves. Instead, I focused on solutions. I outlined a diagnostic process to identify bottlenecks, proposed efficiency improvements, and provided realistic timelines. Marcus leaned forward, clearly engaged. "This is the kind of detailed thinking we've been missing. Can you send me a formal proposal?" I promised to have it ready within 48 hours. After the call ended, I sat back and exhaled slowly. This was really happening. Kyle had built his reputation on clients like Vada Industries, relationships I'd helped maintain. Now those clients were questioning his competence and reaching out to me instead. I wasn't stealing anything. I was simply being available when they needed someone reliable. The irony was perfect. Kyle had fired me thinking I was disposable. Instead, he'd freed his most valuable asset to become his direct competitor. While preparing Vada Industries' proposal, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I was reviewing old project files I'd kept, making sure I could reference past successes accurately. Buried in an email chain was something I'd overlooked before. Kyle had inflated client report metrics to make projects appear more successful than they actually were. Numbers were exaggerated. Timelines were misrepresented. Client satisfaction scores were completely fabricated. It wasn't outright fraud, but it was deeply unethical. And if clients ever audited these reports against actual results, Kyle would have serious problems. I sat staring at the screen for a long time. This was ammunition, real, substantial ammunition. I could expose him, destroy his reputation instantly. But something held me back. Using this information felt too aggressive, too risky. If I went public with accusations, he could claim I was a disgruntled former employee. It might damage my credibility as much as his. Instead, I saved the evidence carefully, backing it up in multiple secure locations. I'd keep it as insurance, something to use only if he attacked me directly. For now, my best strategy remained the same. Do excellent work. Build genuine relationships. Let Kyle's incompetence reveal itself naturally. Revenge didn't require attacking him. It required succeeding where he was failing. 2 weeks later, Kyle held another company meeting. This time, he announced a major victory. Harrington Consulting had signed a significant new client, a tech startup with ambitious growth plans. Kyle presented it as proof of his leadership and vision, but I knew the truth. That client relationship had started with my initial outreach 8 months ago. I'd done the preliminary research, identified their needs, crafted the proposal. Kyle and Troy had simply closed the deal after I was gone. My former colleague texted me during the meeting. "He's literally taking credit for your work. Everyone knows it." I typed back quickly. "Let him, the truth always comes out." What Kyle didn't realize was that several people in that meeting understood exactly what was happening. They'd watched me build relationships and solve problems. They'd seen Kyle take credit before. His gloating wasn't impressive. It was transparent. And some clients were starting to notice too. I received a LinkedIn message that afternoon from someone who'd been in a meeting with Kyle recently. He claimed sole responsibility for a project outcome I know you delivered. Just wanted you to know some of us see through it. I thanked them privately. These small acknowledgments mattered. They confirmed I wasn't imagining the injustice. And they meant that when the time came, I wouldn't be the only one telling the truth. 3 months after my firing, Vada Industries made it official. They were ending their contract with Harrington Consulting and hiring me as their primary strategy consultant. The contract was substantial, 6 months with an option to extend. Marcus called personally to share the news. "You've already delivered more value in our preliminary sessions than we got from Kyle in the past year. This was an easy decision." I thanked him professionally, though my hands were shaking with excitement. "I won't let you down." After hanging up, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. This was my first major public victory. Kyle would hear about it within hours. The business community was small and news traveled fast. I imagined his reaction. The shock, the anger, the realization that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Part of me felt guilty for that satisfaction, but mostly I felt vindicated. I'd been right. My work had value. My relationships were real. Kyle had thrown me away thinking I was worthless, and now his former client had chosen me over him. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my former colleague. "Kyle just found out about Vada. He's furious. Called an emergency meeting. You're officially on his radar now." I smiled and put my phone down. Good. Let him worry. Let him scramble. I wasn't hiding anymore. The pressure on Kyle intensified over the following weeks. 2 other projects at Harrington Consulting fell behind schedule. Clients started asking pointed questions. Troy, overwhelmed and inexperienced, made costly mistakes that damaged relationships. One former colleague who still worked there described the atmosphere as tense and chaotic. "Kyle keeps saying everything's fine, but people are nervous. Some are quietly updating their resumes." Then Kyle announced a surprise project during a team meeting, something ambitious and complex that required expertise his current team didn't have. It was supposed to demonstrate Harrington Consulting's capabilities and win back client confidence, but everyone in that room knew they weren't equipped to deliver it. My source texted me immediately. "He's panicking. This project is way beyond Troy's abilities, and Kyle doesn't have the technical knowledge to manage it himself. It's going to be a disaster." I read the message and felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt bad for my former colleagues who'd be stuck fixing Kyle's mess, but another part recognized that this was the natural consequence of his poor leadership. He'd built a company on other people's work, then systematically pushed those people away. Now he was discovering what happened when the foundation crumbled. A week later, something unexpected happened. The complex project Kyle had announced. The client chose to work with me instead. They'd seen my work with Vada Industries and Audrey's company. They'd heard positive feedback through industry networks. When they evaluated options, my proposal was clearer, more realistic, and backed by a track record of actual delivery. Kyle wasn't even told I was being considered until after the decision was made. My former colleague described his reaction. His eyes went huge. He just stared at his computer screen for like 5 minutes. Then he closed his office door. Nobody's seen him since. I felt a surge of triumph so strong it almost scared me. This wasn't just winning a project. This was public validation that I was better at this work than the person who'd fired me. The client published a brief announcement on LinkedIn, thanking me for my innovative approach and genuine expertise. 3 industry contacts congratulated me within hours. My phone started ringing with new inquiries. Meanwhile, Kyle's silence was deafening. No public response, no congratulations, nothing. He was trapped between acknowledging my success, which would validate that firing me had been a mistake, or ignoring it and looking petty. Either way, I'd won this round, and I hadn't even had to say a word against him. Not everything went smoothly. One of Kyle's longest-standing clients, a financial services company I'd worked with extensively, hesitated to switch to me. Their CEO, Patricia, valued loyalty and didn't want to abandon Kyle during difficult times. She agreed to meet with me but made her reservations clear. "Kyle and I have worked together for 5 years. I don't make changes lightly." I respected that completely. Instead of pushing, I focused on understanding their needs. I asked questions. I listened carefully. I acknowledged the value of their existing relationship while gently highlighting gaps in recent service delivery. "I'm not asking you to make an immediate change," I said honestly. "I'm just offering an alternative if you ever need one." Over several conversations, Patricia started opening up about frustrations she'd been quietly harboring, missed deadlines, communication lapses, a sense that Kyle didn't prioritize their account anymore. I didn't exploit those frustrations. I simply addressed them with concrete solutions. Finally, after our fourth meeting, Patricia made a decision. I'll give you a small project first, a trial. If it goes well, we'll talk about expanding the relationship. I accepted immediately. This was all I needed, a chance to prove myself. 1 month later, I delivered the project ahead of schedule and under budget. Patricia was impressed. 2 weeks after that, she ended her contract with Harrington Consulting. 6 months after my firing, I was invited to speak at a regional business conference about client relationship management. It was a small speaking slot. Only 20 minutes, but it represented something significant. I was being recognized publicly as an expert in my field. I prepared carefully, focusing on authenticity, transparency, and genuine problem solving. I talked about the importance of listening to clients rather than just selling to them. I emphasized sustainable relationships over short-term profits. I never mentioned Kyle or Harrington Consulting by name, but anyone familiar with the industry understood the contrast I was drawing. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Several attendees approached me afterward, asking for my contact information. 2 were clients currently working with Harrington Consulting. They didn't say it directly, but their questions made their interest clear. Then something happened that I hadn't anticipated. Someone recorded my talk and posted clips on LinkedIn. Within 2 days, it had thousands of views. Industry leaders were commenting, sharing, praising my insights. My phone exploded with messages, and Kyle saw it. My former colleague told me he watched the video during a team meeting, his expression darkening with each minute. Afterward, he dismissed it as basic concepts dressed up with fancy language. But the damage was done. I was visible now, undeniably, publicly successful. Just when everything seemed to be going perfectly, something went wrong. One of the colleagues I'd been collaborating with, someone I'd trusted, leaked one of my project proposals to Kyle. I discovered it when a potential client mentioned they'd received a similar proposal from Harrington Consulting, submitted just hours after mine. The specifics were too close to be coincidence. I felt betrayed and furious. I confronted my colleague through a careful, professional message. He didn't deny it, just offered a weak excuse about maintaining options and not burning bridges with Kyle. I ended our collaboration immediately. For a moment, I felt shaken. If someone I'd trusted could betray me, who else might? Was I being too open with my strategies? That night, I reviewed all my current projects and contacts, reassessing security and discretion. But then I realized something important. Kyle knowing my strategies didn't matter if I was always one step ahead. Ideas were valuable, but execution was everything. He could copy my proposals all he wanted. Without genuine expertise and relationships, they were just empty words. I'd built my success on substance, not smoke and mirrors. He couldn't replicate that by stealing documents. The betrayal stung, but it didn't actually threaten what I was building. If anything, it proved I was doing something worth copying. 8 months after my firing, I made my biggest move yet. Kyle's largest remaining client, an enterprise software company called Titan Systems, was approaching contract renewal. I'd worked closely with their VP of operations during my time at Harrington, solving critical problems that had saved them hundreds of thousands in potential losses. I reached out to her directly, not to pitch my services, but simply to reconnect. We had coffee. She vented about recent frustrations with Harrington Consulting, projects stalling, communication breakdowns, a sense that Kyle's attention was elsewhere. I listened, then asked if she'd be open to seeing what I could offer. A week later, I presented Titan Systems with a comprehensive proposal. 6 months of strategic consulting, with clear deliverables, transparent pricing, and a performance guarantee Kyle would never risk offering. I included testimonials from Vada Industries and Patricia's financial services company. I provided case studies showing measurable results. The proposal was 50 pages of substance. The VP called me 2 days later. "We're making a change. When can you start?" I managed to keep my voice steady. "Immediately." Kyle found out the same day the announcement went public. Titan Systems represented nearly 40% of his remaining revenue. Losing them wasn't just embarrassing. It was financially devastating. My former colleague texted me that evening. "He's scrambling, emergency calls with investors, trying to figure out how to explain this." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The numbers spoke for themselves. The next day, Titan Systems published a statement on their company blog about their consulting transition. It wasn't required, but their VP wanted to explain the decision to stakeholders. The statement was professional but pointed. "We're excited to partner with Sela Monroe's consulting practice, which has consistently demonstrated expertise, reliability, and genuine commitment to client success. We look forward to this new chapter." The post included specific examples of my past work with them, outcomes I'd delivered, problems I'd solved. It was essentially a public endorsement of my capabilities over Kyle's. The response was immediate. Industry news sites picked up the story. LinkedIn exploded with comments and shares. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to congratulate me. 3 new consulting inquiries arrived in my inbox that afternoon alone. But the most satisfying response came from clients still working with Harrington Consulting. Several reached out privately, asking if I had capacity for new projects. They'd been watching my trajectory, reading the testimonials, seeing the results. They wanted what Titan Systems had. Meanwhile, Kyle's social media went silent. No response to the announcement, no attempt to spin the narrative. For someone who'd always been vocal about his company's successes, the silence was telling. He was embarrassed, indirectly humiliated by a client publicly praising the employee he'd fired. And everyone in our industry noticed. 2 weeks after Titan Systems, I made a move I'd been planning for months. A small consulting firm that Kyle regularly subcontracted for specialized projects was looking for an investor. They were talented but cash-strapped, struggling with operations. I'd known the owner, Camilla, for years. We'd worked together on several successful projects. I approached her with a proposal. I'd invest enough to stabilize their operations in exchange for a partnership stake. They'd maintain independence but gain financial security. And critically, they'd stop subcontracting for Harrington Consulting. Camilla accepted within a week. The partnership announcement went out quietly, just a brief press release that most people wouldn't notice. But Kyle noticed. Because suddenly, projects that relied on that subcontractor's specialized expertise were in jeopardy. He'd have to find alternatives, likely more expensive and less reliable ones. I didn't announce my involvement publicly. I didn't need to gloat. The strategic advantage was enough. Kyle depended on external expertise because he'd pushed away internal talent. Now even his external resources were shifting away from him. A former colleague texted me when Kyle found out. "He's furious. Keeps saying you're sabotaging him deliberately." I smiled at that message. Sabotage implied I was doing something wrong. I was just making smart business decisions. If those decisions happened to complicate his operations, well, that was simply the market at work. Over the following months, Kyle's situation deteriorated rapidly. 3 more clients left Harrington Consulting. 2 came to me directly. 1 chose a different competitor, but their departure statement specifically mentioned inconsistent service quality and poor communication. Projects collapsed under Troy's inexperienced leadership. The ambitious initiative Kyle had announced to demonstrate his company's capabilities failed spectacularly, delivered months late and missing key deliverables. The client refused to pay the final invoice and left a scathing review. Colleagues who'd laughed when Kyle fired me were now quietly updating LinkedIn profiles and taking calls from recruiters. The office atmosphere was reportedly toxic, with Kyle blaming everyone except himself for the company's struggles. Then Troy quit. According to my sources, he'd finally had enough of being blamed for problems Kyle had created. He left without another position lined up, just desperate to escape. His resignation was the final crack in Kyle's facade. Without Troy, even the pretense of capable leadership was gone. Industry gossip described Harrington Consulting as circling the drain. Investors were asking difficult questions. The few remaining clients were being courted aggressively by competitors. And me, I was thriving. I'd built a consulting practice that was profitable, sustainable, and respected. I had more clients than I could handle and a waiting list of inquiries. I'd proven everything Kyle had tried to deny. I was good at this work. I was valuable, and I absolutely didn't need him. The moment of ultimate poetic justice arrived at a regional business conference 10 months after my firing. I was attending as a speaker, presenting on ethical consulting practices to a packed room. Kyle was there too, though I didn't know it until I saw him in the audience. Our eyes met briefly. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between anger and resignation. My presentation went well. I talked about transparency, sustainable client relationships, and the importance of genuine expertise over flashy marketing. I shared case studies, measurable results, lessons learned. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions. After my talk, during the Q&A session, someone asked about handling difficult clients. I answered honestly, discussing patience, communication, and mutual respect. Then another audience member asked a more pointed question. There's been a lot of discussion in the industry recently about consulting firms that overpromise and underdeliver. How do you recommend clients identify and avoid those situations? The room went quiet. Everyone knew this was about more than hypothetical scenarios. I chose my words carefully. Look at track records, not promises. Ask for references and actually contact them. Trust actions over words. And if something feels wrong, if communication is poor or results aren't matching expectations, don't hesitate to make a change. Kyle stood up and left the room mid-answer. Several people noticed. The moderator looked uncomfortable, but I continued calmly, professionally, as if nothing had happened. I didn't need to name him. Everyone understood the subtext. The truth had spoken for itself. By the end of that year, I'd consolidated my position as a respected independent consultant with a roster of clients who valued my work. I'd hired 2 associates, both talented professionals who'd been underestimated at previous positions. We worked from a small office downtown, nothing fancy but ours. Financially, I was earning more than I ever had at Harrington Consulting. Emotionally, I was free. No more wondering if my work would be credited to someone else. No more watching less qualified people get promoted over me. No more silencing my expertise to make insecure leaders comfortable. I worked with clients who valued my input, respected my time, and paid fairly for my expertise. The contrast with my old life was stark. I thought about Kyle sometimes, wondered how he was managing. But mostly, I focused forward. I'd learned important lessons from that experience. I knew my worth now in ways I hadn't before. I understood that loyalty to bad leadership was wasted energy, and I discovered that sometimes the worst professional moments become catalysts for the best decisions. Getting fired had felt like the end of everything. It turned out to be the beginning of something better than I'd imagined possible. Success wasn't about revenge. It was about building something genuine, sustainable, and mine. And I'd done exactly that. I was giving a talk at a women's business summit when a young professional approached me afterward. She looked nervous but determined. "I just got fired from a job I loved," she said quietly. "My boss said I wasn't a good fit, but I know it was because I questioned his decisions. How did you get through it?" I thought about Kyle's smile that day in the office, the humiliation, the anger. I thought about the long nights planning, the careful strategy, the patient execution. I thought about where I was now versus where I'd been. "The first thing I did was allow myself to be angry," I said honestly. "But then I channeled that anger into something productive. I documented everything I knew. I reached out to relationships I'd built honestly. I focused on doing excellent work rather than tearing anyone else down, and I trusted that quality would speak for itself eventually." She nodded, taking notes on her phone. "Did you ever regret leaving?" "Never. Getting fired was the push I needed to build something better. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion of you. It's determined by the value you create and the integrity you maintain." She thanked me and walked away looking more confident. As I packed up my materials, I thought about Kyle one last time. I hoped he'd learned something from watching his company crumble while I thrived. Know your worth. Walk away from those who doubt you. Build something they can't ignore. And succeed so quietly and completely that they can't help but notice. That's not revenge. That's justice.